Hey, it's Password Dots. On today's Let's Stitch, we're making a fat, greedy penguin in a bathrobe. They should call him King Greedy, am I right? Wow, so what a project we've got here today. Making one of my favorite video game characters, King Dedede. This was not an easy build, so I just want to jump right into it. Let's get started. Needless to say, a lot of materials went into this build, so let's break the whole thing down. First, we've got one blue sock. We've got one yellow sock. We also have one goldenrod sock. We have two red knit caps. We've also got one white fuzzy sock, one pale yellow handkerchief or pocket square, red, blue, and yellow ribbon, black scrap of fabric, a pair of white buttons, scissors, fabric glue, needle and colored thread, and some pins. Oh, also, some other things that I used in this were some paper, a pen, a chopstick, measuring tape, and a scrap bin. Starting out, I've got my single blue sock, and I'm going to cut the ankle off right above the heel. This is the only blue sock that I've got, so I'm going to use just about every bit of it, quite scrupulously. I'm keeping a tight grip near the top to form a separation between the head segment and the body segment. And I'm going to further segregate those two pieces with a running stitch. Super easy stitch. Let's take a look. I also think of this as the dolphin stitch. You're just reaching in and out of the waves, up and down through the top side and the underside of your fabric. This is a super easy way to create a cinch and keep the head and the bottom looking like two totally separate pieces. But to secure it further, we're going to do a ladder stitch, also easy. Between your two seams, you stitch across like the rung of a ladder, and then up like the leg of a ladder, then across like the rung, above like the leg, across like the rung, like the leg, like the rung, like the leg, like the rung, like the leg, like the rung. The ladder stitch helps the head and the body segment look separated, but not disconnected. Closing up the butt, using my ladder stitch, you won't notice much of a seam there because the feet are gonna mask that. So, you know, just an easy little fact of life. Moving on, I'm taking the top part of the sock, the blue sock that we set aside earlier, and I'm gonna make the arms out of that. This is where I'm using the pen and paper because that's gonna help me keep a consistent shape by making a pattern. Did I say I was gonna use a pattern? I'm saying now that I've got a pattern. The pattern helps ensure that the two pieces you're building are going to be identical. That's just common sense. And I'm able to fit both of my arm patterns onto the one sock. So very strategic on my part, super smart guy. And so now I'm just going to pin the pattern to my sock and stitch it on up. The sock is inside out right now, so that when I flip it, the stitching is on the inside of the fabric. Using the running stitch here, by the way. And now the paper can just tear right off. It's already kind of perforated by using the running stitch. There are going to be a couple pieces left over, but I'm not concerned about that. It's not going to be noticeable once you flip it out and stuff it. So, cutting my pieces out, I probably should have kept the paper on there so I would have been able to see the lines more easily, but everything worked out for the best. Here's where that chopstick comes in handy to get those really fine details out, and it also helps me stuff it with tiny little pieces of stuffing. I just want to make sure I get that entire thing filled consistently, nice and even. Using the ladder stitch to close the arms at the top. Next up, we want to build the feet, the gloves, and the beak. And for that, we want some goldenrod type of yellow socks. I got these elephant socks from a Target, and obviously they got a little elephant on them, so I can't use all of it, but that's okay, because I just bought a lot. And, you know, when it comes to the art of found object sculpture, also known as making out of socks, you just gotta make do with what you have sometimes. When life gives you lemons, you just eat the lemons, dummy. I cut the heel off of two of those socks. Those are going to be my feet. They're already round and sort of well suited for that egg-like foot shape, so I'm just using the pattern to my advantage. With those pieces flipped inside out, I can and stitch that together using the running stitch. Then flip it right side out again and stuff it. Then finish that with the ladder stitch. That's a consistent pattern that I go by. When it's inside out, use the running stitch. When it's right side out, use the ladder stitch. Ladder stitch keeps the seams concealed. After that, it was time to pattern the gloves, which I absolutely hated. I just didn't have a lot of yellow fabric real estate to work with. But I had a lot of little pieces, so I kinda made it work. Here I am just tracing out the pattern on the inside of the yellow sock. It's just a very simple mitten pattern, and I've cut that out. Each mitten is going to be 2 whole sides of the sock. By that I mean there are 4 pieces making 1 pair of mittens. Each of those pieces is double-sided. I didn't want it to look like just a second skin that's been grafted onto his hands. I wanted it to look like a pair of mittens. So that's why it's so thick and layered up. And I ladder stitched the whole thing together. Also at the end, I threw a quick strip of that sock around the top to make a sort of cuff, a rough cuff. And now it's time for me to do the beak, which I also didn't enjoy. It's just a really small piece, and it's hard to make that whole thing not fall apart when you're working that small. And it's a lot. I tried to keep it as few pieces as possible because I'm just lazy. But the top piece is cut out, shaped kind of like a symbol, like the top part of a symbol. I just stitched the entire thing up. I wasn't worried about ladder stitching afterwards, flipping it inside out, blah, blah, blah. Stitched the whole thing tight. Then cut a tiny hole on the back side, facing the face that you don't see, and then flipped it, then stuffed it, and then I sewed that back up. The bottom piece was largely the same, just kind of a half moon shape instead of a symbol. Then take the black scrap of fabric, it's just like an old t-shirt that I've got, and ladder stitch that onto the bottom of the mouth, and then tiny little bit of the red cap to form the tongue. So, with the base built, with the body done, now we can start doing some draping. We can put those clothes on them. That's what I got the handkerchief for. It was something that I started out really excited for, and then it all really went south from there. A lot of the stuff I got for the clothes came from a Macy's liquidation. Macy's, going out of business at a location near you. And this pocket square, it's a silk pocket square. Not cheap. Even with the half off or whatever, 60% or something that I got on this handkerchief, still maybe spent a little more than I should have on it, but I thought it was worth it. I felt really good about it, and then I tried to drape it onto my doll and figured it's gonna be a lot more than a color by numbers kind of job. But did that stop me from being really lazy about it? No. Draping it more or less like a toga with the good side facing in. I just pinned it around the mid-body to hold that together, then flipped the bottom half up like it's a skirt over an air vent, and then just running stitched that all the way down. Tried to mimic the stitch that the fabric already has on it, that the pocket squares already got. It's all about consistency on this show. Is this the right time to mention that my camera died while I was sewing the eyes on? Is that... Should I say that now? Anyway, I've got a lot of excess handkerchief down at the bottom, and I didn't want to cut the handkerchief because I didn't want the silk to fray. I don't want to serge any edges. I don't have a serger. That's just really hard. So I just pinned the whole thing up. I'm expecting the sash to cover that up later. And here's where I decide I'm going to stitch on the arms. Yeah, I want some looseness to them because he kind of flaps. Because he's a penguin, he's a bird. Just flapping. Anyway, sachet away. I've got my yellow ribbon that I'm wrapping around the belly of the deeds. And that's going to give me an approximated length. So I just cut that off. And the red part of the belt is just going to overlay on top of the yellow. So the red part's what I'm going to cut out. That's what I want the tape measure for. I'm going to make sure that each of those triangles is evenly spaced. So I've got some pins that are going to mark the bottom peaks and some pins that are going to mark the top peaks. It is a pretty basic approximation. It wasn't the most accurate rubric, but I wasn't really concerned. I generally prefer authenticity over accuracy. You can call that being lazy. I can call that being an artisan. Now the cool thing about most ribbon is that it's got a bit of plastic in it. So to clean the edges off, all you gotta do is burn it. Using my lighter, I made several quick passes along the cut edge of my ribbon and melted it to bond the threads back together. You just gotta keep it moving. So instead of sewing all of this together, I'm just gonna glue it. That's gonna be way easier than trying to get my thread evenly throughout the whole thing. I don't want to tear anything, it's just not gonna work. And this is just Elmer's brand fabric glue, nothing fancy. I used my girlfriend's makeup brush to spread the glue evenly across the ribbon and pressed it to its mate. And you can cover the whole thing in glue, honestly. It dries clear, and if it's a bit shinier than it was before, that's no cause for grief. So here's the thing. The glue label recommends that you let this piece dry for about 24 hours. I'm not going to do that. I don't really have the kind of time to wait around before it, so it's going to sit for maybe 8. Okay, while I wait for the belt to dry, I'm going to assemble the rope. So I've got one of my red caps, just draping it to get an idea of how I need to cut it, and I'll cut the bottom part off in a rough curve. And to make room for the arms, I'm just going to cut these tiny little holes on either side to slip those arms through. The armholes are working out well. Now I just need to trim the top part of that cap off. Oh, I think it looks pretty cool. Little high collar Dedede robe going on. Double check to make sure everything's sitting right. It is, so I'm not going to worry about that for a minute. We can just set that to the side. Now I'm going to pull out my second red cap, and I'm going to make the sleeves. Dedede sleeves are much wider at the wrists than they are at the shoulder, so I'm keeping that in mind as I measure and cut those pieces. Inside out, running stitch. I'm fitting these sleeves to the arms so I know whether they'll fit properly, and they do, so that's good. And next I've got to put that trim on, so I've got the white fuzzy sock and I'm cutting the ankle off the top for the sleeve cuffs. My intention is for the trim to extend the length beyond the robe itself, so I've attached the one end at the base of the wrist with a running stitch, and then I flipped the other end over to stitch to the inside of the sleeve. With the rest of the sock, I splay it open like a pair of wings and then cut that in half. That gives me 4 total pieces. I only ended up needing 3, but it was good to finally have a little bit of excess fabric for once in this project. This is a rinse and repeat of the sleeve cuffs, just with a little added bit of ladder stitching all of the individual pieces together when I reach the seams. Then I've got to cut a rectangle out of my big hat so I can turn that into a little hat. I take the rectangle and fold it over hamburger style and then cut that into a trapezoid shape. Stitch that up with the running stitch. Looks a little bit like a yarmulke, but it won't look like that when it's done. You might recognize the yellow sock from my papyrus video. And it's the only time that I used that yellow sock in this design. According to his Smash model, his hat trim is different from his beak, his gloves, and his feet. I don't know why, but for some reason that's one thing I decided I'm going to be accurate about. This is more or less the same process as what I had done with the fuzzy trim, only now there's an egg on top. I had some pins to help me keep the hat tight on his head and a bit of stuffing to fill out the underneath. Then I used one of my curved needles to give me a better working angle, but I'm still doing a running stitch. These are also called suture needles, but they're used for quilting and upholstery and penguin making, so it worked out alright, in my favor. Alright, we are at the home stretch, and I just need a little bit more work before well, really I'm just out of time. So, I'm gonna hustle here to the end. Just stay with me. I need some music to get me going. I need some of that King Dedede's theme. Come on! Content ID me, Nintendo, let's go! So, am I happy with it? At first, I wasn't really. I had some different expectations as to how this whole build was going to go, but I had some time to think about it, and yeah, it's alright with me. I think it turned out just fine. So until next time, stay greedy, my friends.